The greatest indicator of future violence is past violence. We talk to an expert on staff about removing guns from domestic abusers and preventing future tragedies right now on CSGV at Home. Hello and welcome to CSGV at Home. We are in Wear Orange Gun Violence Awareness Month, the month of June. We are talking today with our State Affairs Manager, Lisa Geller, about the role of domestic violence and gun violence. Lisa, I want to thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So when we talk about the gun violence epidemic, so much of it is linked. We just saw in Colorado Springs this shooting at this birthday party where a man went and shot his girlfriend and all these friends. It horrific. That is a scene that ever since I've been doing this work, I've seen dozens of times. Just to see someone who is prone to violence or has a history of domestic violence. We don't know if this individual did, but like just intimate partner violence. What is the role between domestic violence and gun violence and easy access to guns?
That's a really important question. So to start off, it's important to remember the facts. We know that every day over 100 people are killed with a gun. We know that every single day over 200 people are shot and survive those injuries. But we also don't talk enough about the role that guns play in threatening harm. And so what's often ignored when we look at just the fatalities and the non-fatal injuries is the role that guns play to threaten and coerce and intimidate. And that's especially important when we're talking about domestic violence. We know that, that guns are used not just to kill in these situations, they're used to threaten, to coerce, to harm psychologically. And those are important things to remember when we talk about domestic violence and gun violence. We also know that when an abusive partner has access to a gun in the home, that the risk that the abused individual will be shot increases by 400%. So that's a significant increase just by having a gun in the home. And the last thing I'll say about this link is that we know that about 1 in 4 homicides in the US are related to domestic violence. So it's really critical when we talk about this problem of gun violence that we think about all forms, and certainly domestic violence is one of those.
I mean, expanding on the role between guns and domestic violence, it is far too easy. We hear all the time from the gun lobby, and like I think Ted Cruz was saying it the other day in one of the hearings, law-abiding citizens with guns. But a lot of people who have been convicted of violent misdemeanors and have been convicted of violent crimes still have access to guns. Why is that? Why is it so easy for those who have a history of violence to have access to this weapon that makes it so easy to kill?
It's a huge problem in this country. We know that past violence is the best predictor of future violence. And so when we're looking at these individuals at risk of harm, we certainly want to look at their histories. And domestic violence is a significant risk factor for future violence, including gun violence and including mass shootings. And so what happens in a lot of states that do have protections in place that would, theoretically require a firearm to be removed from someone who has a history of domestic violence, is that sometimes there are gaps in these laws where the removal process is not clearly outlined, or where it's not explicit that a firearm has to be removed by this day, or it's not clear where the firearm should go when it's removed. And so when all of these processes are a little ambiguous, there is potential for people to fall through the gaps, for firearms to not actually be removed. And so when we talk about these policies, it's not enough to just have policies in place that would remove firearms from domestic abusers. We also need to implement them properly. That means raising awareness about the laws in a state. That means properly funding these initiatives so that they can actually be used as intended.
Yeah. So we have a little bit of a CSGV at Home exclusive here with you here. Just recently, the paper that you authored was published in the Injury Epidemiology about the role of domestic violence in mass shootings. What can you tell us about your paper?
Thank you for asking that. I'm excited about this paper because I think there have been, some of these findings have been discussed in the past, but there are new findings in this paper that I want the public to be aware of. And so what we found in our paper was that, similar to what prior studies have shown, is that most mass shootings, when defined as 4 or more shot and killed, and we looked at the years 2014 to 2019 in our study, we found that the majority of mass shootings were related to domestic violence, which means that either the person shot or killed was a family or intimate partner, or the perpetrator had a history of domestic violence. And so when we used those criterion, we found that 68% of mass shootings are related to domestic violence. One of the other significant findings of this paper was that the case fatality rate, meaning the number of people that die, over the total number of people that are shot, was higher for these domestic violence related shootings. So while fewer victims on average were shot and killed in domestic violence shootings, a higher percentage of them actually died from these wounds. And this is a significant and important finding because it shows that potentially these were more targeted shootings where there were specific victims that were intended to be shot and killed, which is different from some of these public mass shootings that we look at where a shooter may be shooting indiscriminately. But this is something that I hope that will be more of a focus in future research about the kind of lethality or case fatality rates of these mass shootings.
Yeah, when we talk about getting the guns out of the hands of dangerous people, this is a prime example of that. Before, like, domestic violence, a lot of people think of that in the home, but so often when it leaves the home, it affects law enforcement, it affects innocent people. It can lead to these mass shootings that we've seen, like you said. So it's incredible work, and congratulations on it. Where can our people watching this go to learn more about disarming domestic violence and how the laws are in their states and what we can do about this?
Thank you for asking that. We actually have a website dedicated solely to that purpose. It's called disarmdv.org. It stands for Disarm Domestic Violence. And this is a website that the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence and our partners at the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, and Prosecutors Against Gun Violence have created to look specifically at what the laws are in each of the states, 50 states in DC, about the intersection of domestic violence and firearms. We also outline the processes for removing firearms in those states if it's explicit. You can look at research on the intersection of gun violence and domestic violence, and where it's available, you can see the statistics on domestic violence homicides in these states. So disarmdv.org.
Incredible work. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lisa. We will talk again soon.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Take care.